Welcome to the Warfare Parenting Podcast. I'm Laine Lawson Craft, here to walk with you through the ups and downs of parenting prodigals. In every episode, we're going to get real about the struggles, sharing stories of hope, and learning how faith can turn things around. So let's dive in and discover the path to healing and hope together. Welcome to the Warfare Parenting Podcast. I'm Laine Lawson Craft. I'm so excited you're here today. I don't know about you, but when I was raising teenagers, I can remember asking myself, am I the only ones that has these crazy kids? And my marriage at one time was just a disaster. And I would look at others and I would think, they have a perfect marriage. Their kids are perfect. Their homes are perfect. And I would feel so inadequate. I don't know about you today, but if you feel this way, you're going to love today's podcast. I have Jill Savage. Hello, Jill. How are you?
Hi, so good to be with you.
Well, you are a woman full of wisdom. You've lived it. I want to say that you're an author, a speaker who is passionate about encouraging families. You are the author and co-author of 14 books. She's the founder of Hearts at Home, an organization that encouraged moms from 1994 to 2017. And Jill and her husband, Mark, have 5 children, 3 of whom are married and have 8 grandchildren. So, Jill, I'm so grateful. Today, we are going to focus on love this book, No More Perfect Moms. Learn to love your real life. Jill, my first question is when I opened the book, the introduction said, I am literally writing the introduction today while my daughter is becoming a mom of a second child. And I just loved that because what I really wanted to know, what inspired you to write No More Perfect Moms?
Yeah. Well, I tell you, all of my books come out of my mistakes. So, I've made lots of mistakes, learned lots of lessons, and then begin to realize, maybe somebody else needs this encouragement. Maybe somebody else needs this. So I did a lot of comparing. I really struggled with comparing myself to other women, to other families. And I really had to get that under control because what it was doing, it was robbing me of contentment.
Yeah.
And so I just decided we need a really honest discussion. And, the funny thing is, the very first story in the book is a story of me forgetting my daughter at school.
I loved that. Yes, yes.
Yep. And so, middle child, of course, to this day, we all laugh about that story, that she was at school doing like an after school sports event and I just lost track of time. And she called and was like, Mom, where are you? And I'm like, oh my gosh, wait a minute. One is missing.
I love it.
So yeah, I just wanted a really honest conversation about the real stuff of parenting, the real stuff of life, how we do tend to compare ourselves to each other and how that is robbing us of so much joy and contentment.
Amen. And you call this the perfection infection.
Yep.
I love this. What is the perfection infection and why does it matter?
Yeah. Well, the perfection infection is when we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves and when we unfairly compare ourselves to others. And so what happens in that is, we'll have these unrealistic expectations of ourselves. And then we feel less than, we feel not enough. And man, the enemy just robs our joy. And then when we unfairly compare ourselves to others, what we're doing there is we're comparing our insides to other people's outsides. And when we do that, we are coming up with wrong conclusions. And so what I think is so very important is for us to begin to kick the perfection infection out of our life. It's going to increase our contentment and it's going to increase our joy. But what we have to recognize is sometimes the perfection infection invades our parenting. And that's when we have unrealistic expectations of our kids and we unfairly compare our kids to others. And it can even infect our marriage when we have unrealistic expectations of our spouse or we have unrealistic expectations of marriage in general. And we compare the insides of our marriage to the outsides of another marriage. So we unfairly compare. And what we're really doing is we're setting ourselves up for perpetual disappointment, discouragement, and even like it can lead to like a disconnection.
Yes. And I love this too. I kind of think the sub of that is we lose our authenticity because if
Yeah.
we're constantly comparing ourselves to another mom, another wife, our kids, then we're really not living in the lane, no pun intended, that God had placed all of us in, right?
Yeah, right. We're not able to celebrate who we are. And instead, all we see is who we're not because we're like, what I want her looks. I want her body. I want her volunteer equipping. I want her job. I want her kids. I want her house. It's like all we see is what we don't have. And instead of seeing what we do have, our giftings, our home that the Lord has provided, our unique children, our spouse, who no, he's not like the guy next door, but he's like him. Like he is the man that God has created him to be. And so being able to celebrate who we are, what we have, without wishing it was something different.
Well, that's what's so valuable about this book too, Jill. The reason I love it, not only do you talk about just motherhood, I mean, you talk about friendships, you talk about all parts of us. It's particularly women. I'm sitting here and this wasn't even a part of the episode, but we never really get over that. I mean, here I am 60, I'm a grandmother, and this eternal comparison to look younger and thinner is still somewhat there. And I'm being authentic here. I mean, it is a battle, but I think it's a human nature battle. And we just, you have some wonderful applications in the back of the book that we'll get to later. Just, well, matter of fact, there's an antidote in your book about how do we get away from this perfection? And I'd love for you to talk about that just a bit.
Yeah. Well, we use what I call the God tools. And the God tools are specific ways that God gives us to begin to kick that perfection infection out of our life. For instance, one is the God tool of courage. And what does that look like? Well, it's the courage to be yourself and to be okay being yourself. It's the courage to show your real stuff in life and to help kick the perfection infection out for all of us. Laine, it's really funny because I've only gone viral on social media once or twice, and I can remember one of them. The one, I think it's maybe been 2 or 3 times, but I remember one. And one is when I had been traveling a lot. I had just been, my bedroom was a mess. I had unpacked a suitcase or I had packed a suitcase, come home, and I needed to go on another trip. And honestly, I had just left that suitcase, got a new one. I mean, it was like a mess. It was embarrassing. And one day I was like, there is clothes everywhere, suitcases everywhere. And I was like, I am declaring war on this weekend. And then it struck me. I'm going to take a picture of this and I'm going to share it on Facebook. And I did. I took a picture and I said, this is my current reality. What's yours?
Mm.
You would have thought, I mean, it was like that. I had just shared my most deepest, darkest secret. People were like, oh my gosh, this makes me feel so much better. This makes me feel so much better than what I did. And then they're taking pictures of their realities, like the insides of their car, their children's bedroom, their kitchen sink. I mean, we're all like kicking the perfection infection out and going, hey, we all have struggles. We all have places we can't keep up with life. So that takes courage, right?
Yes.
So that's one of the God tools.
Well, and I was going to say, Jill, I think a lot of that too, you opening up the conversation through this book right there brings it to the light that we don't have to feel shame that our lives can be disastrous at points because life happens. I mean, kids get sick. Your career takes more energy than you've got, and so I think that's why I love this book too. It kind of breaks you free immediately, just being candid and authentic and real about the battle to not compare, the battle not to feel shame when maybe everything isn't perfect, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And one of the other God tools is grace, and giving ourselves the grace space to be human and to not be constantly criticizing ourselves and putting pressure on ourselves to be perfect. And, I do believe that God calls us to excellence. There's no doubt. But what happens is the enemy quickly pushes us from excellence over into perfection, where we feel like we're not enough. And so what that does then is it just causes this, we lose our joy, we lose our contentment, we lose our really a sense of perspective.
That's right. And I found personally, I only really got super disappointed and down when I had such unrealistic expectations, whether it was for me or for my children or for the way I run my household. And that's very important to understand that that steals your joy. Like you said, if you
Yep.
have these unrealistic expectations, then you're never going to be happy, right?
No, you're not. You are not. And that was me. I mean, that's part of what I struggled with. And then I would impose those unrealistic expectations on my spouse and on my kids. That is a pressure. That is really, it's rejection.
Yes.
You're rejecting who they are. You're constantly telling them what they're not doing well or what they're not doing right. And it will steal joy. It will steal connection. And so, I mean, I wish I would have understood that earlier in my mothering. What I will tell you is there's nothing that is beyond God's redemptive power. I feel like God has redeemed so much of that in my marriage, in my mothering. My kids are all now grown, but I'm a different grandmother than I was. I'm a different mother than I was because I've kicked that perfection infection out. But you're right, Laine, there are still times. I'm also 60. And so, you look at our 60-year-old bodies and they're just not what they were. They're not what others have at times. But, here's even what happens with that is the world is always giving us pictures. Like one of the things I'll say is, like you're watching or you're in the checkout line at the grocery store and there's a magazine cover and it says body after baby 3 months. And you see this, like movie star, she's had a baby 3 months ago. She looks fabulous. You look down and you're like, body after baby, 3 years, 30 years, never looked like that.
Right.
Well, the truth is hers doesn't either. That is oftentimes, that has been modified.
Oh,
It has
yes.
been photoshopped.
Yes. Yes.
And so here we are comparing ourselves to something that doesn't even
It's
exist.
not real. It's not real.
No,
I used to do this magazine and I would get these pictures and they would look nothing when I would meet them in person, like the picture. And I realized then, Jill, so much of what I was comparing myself to, what we're talking about right now, was a photo that had been so touched up. It was unreal.
right. And so then we will never measure up to that, ever. And so, man, it is just so important for us to remember that, all of that around us may not be telling us the truth. And honestly, even without like pictures, it can be movies. Okay, we watch a movie, and I'm not anti-movie at all, but we watch a movie, let's keep some perspective. They solve something like life's biggest problem in 2 hours or less. And they were like, why doesn't that happen in my marriage? Why does that happen in my family? Well, because it's not real. Same thing with fiction books. It's not real. And so if we keep trying to measure up or wanting our people in our life to be like the movies or the romance novels, it's not going to happen because it's not real. So we're comparing our very real life to something that isn't real, and we're going to come up short when we do that.
And Jill, the beauty of today is both of us have lived that. I've had a resurrected marriage. I had a 17-year-old marriage that was dead. and God
Yeah.
brought life back to it and love, more importantly. You've restored your marriage. I've had 3 prodigals that were on drugs, alcohol, being arrested, and all those things. And my daughter suffered depression, and God delivered them all. That's the hope today. If today, let's talk about if there's a mom or even a dad out there today listening, and they're saying, my kids are never going to be like my neighbors. My physique, my looks are never going to be as great as Susan's. I mean, what can we do first and foremost?
We can begin with acceptance. Jesus accepted us as we are. Now, and he came to earth to accept us as we are. And of course, he invites us to growth. He invites us to more, but acceptance is a beautiful gift. And so let's talk about that, like especially in other relationships. When we have a child that is constantly disappointing us, that's not news to them. They know that. And so the number one gift we can give them is acceptance. I love you as you are. I love you dearly. I may be grieved at some of the choices that you're making, but that doesn't change the love that I have for you. And you know what? If you've told your child about your disappointment in their choices once, that's all you need to tell them. You don't need to tell them again. You simply accept the reality of where they're at in their journey. You pray. That is the work. Prayer is the work.
Yes.
And so you take all of those worries and those hurts and those wounds and those fears to your God, who is much more powerful than you are and has much more ability to change the dynamics in your child's life or
Amen.
your spouse's life.
Amen.
And so acceptance is this beautiful gift. In fact, what I find is, oftentimes we have these unrealistic expectations. Let's say that they're like, at forehead length. And then we have like our reality. It's at like chin length. And the space in between is discontentment. So if you're constantly discontent in your marriage or with your child, if you actually move to acceptance, what you're doing is you're creating safety in the relationship. And when you create safety in the relationship, it's actually fertilizer for growth. And that actually invites them to some growth because they feel safe with you. They don't feel criticized. They don't feel like they're never enough for you or they're never good enough for you. And that's not getting in the way of their own growth.
And do you find, Jill, as you're speaking this, we spew out kind of what we say to ourselves inside internally. If we're beating ourselves up, if we are constantly, I battled negative self-talk for many years. I'm 5 feet tall. I'll never be the model size. I mean, I could go on and on. And, that kind of pours over to our mates and our children, doesn't it?
It does. You're right. Yeah. Out of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so most definitely that's why I wrote the books in the order I did. No More Perfect Moms was first, No More Perfect Kids was second, and No More Perfect Marriages was third. Well, the reason I did that is because No More Perfect Moms is like, hey, let's deal with our junk in the trunk.
Yes.
Let's deal with our lies and our messages and our places that we're struggling. And because when we do that, we become a better mom, a better spouse. And so I really believe that work is important in our own heart first.
Yes. And I say a healthy mom is a healthy family, healthy relationship. Everybody's healthier when Mama Bear is healthy. At the end of the book, there's a chapter and it says one perfect God. There was one perfect God. I would assume we all need to just really stay focused on that, right, Jill?
Yeah. Well, exactly. So let's stop trying to be perfect and let's embrace being perfected. And what that means is let's embrace that one perfect God is growing us, maturing us, healing us, giving us hope. And that's what the Christian life looks like, is like we're becoming like Jesus, and that's being perfected, right? We won't achieve perfection until heaven, But on this side of heaven, we get the opportunity to grow to be more like Christ all the time. And so what we have to do is we have to move our eyes off the mountains and put it on the mountain mover, and keeping our eyes on that one perfect God who wants to do his best work through the cracks in our lives.
So powerful, isn't it? And really it starts there. Just coming to him and receiving that unconditional love. Hey God, I've messed up. I've been beating myself up. I've been beating up everybody I love. Can you help me?
Yeah,
Can you remake me, mold me, and accept that unconditional love and grace and mercy that we need to be able to pour out, right, Jill?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because then when we can receive that, it's like then we get full of that, and then that overflows to
Amen.
those around us.
So I have a question. What is the result we experience when we kick the perfection infection out of our life? What will happen?
Contentment. We'll realize that the grass really isn't greener on the other side of the fence. We'll become, we'll be accepting of our very real spouse, our real children, our real lives. We'll experience freedom, freedom found in Jesus Christ. And then I believe we'll experience hope that the God of that God does his best work in the cracks in our lives. So we recognize that these imperfections that we deal with, the mistakes that we make, are just an opportunity when we can be humble, when we can own that, when we can begin the process of moving forward, we can recognize that that is where God's light will shine through in the most beautiful way.
I saw a visual one time, Jill, and it was a cracked pot, of course, and it had all the cracks, and there was a candle inside. And the only way you got to see the candle was through the cracks.
Yep.
And I just thought
That's
that was a beautiful
exactly it.
illustration of just who we are. We're all cracked pots,
Yep.
right?
We sure
And
are.
and that's okay because none of us are perfect. That undermines the power of the cross. None of us are perfect.
Sure.
And it's
Right.
through his
If we
blood
were perfect, there would be no need for Jesus
or
to,
for the cross, right? Amen.
right.
As we wind up today, Jill, I always like to say, is there anything that you would like to say to anyone listening today that is really battling perfection or comparison or any of these things before we leave?
I would say, let it go. Let it go. All of the expectations, the places where you are so critical of yourself. I feel like Jesus is standing next to you. I just sense that he's standing right next to you, and he's got his hand open, and he's got almost like a mother that, they discovered their child has gum in their mouth. They're not supposed to have gum. And they put their hand out and they're like, all right, put it here, put it here. I think that Jesus is standing right there, and he's going, come on, let it go. Let it go. Put it right here in my hand. You don't need to be carrying this anymore. You don't need this pressure. I want to give you freedom. And so I would say, let it go.
And I want to say too to anyone listening today or in the future that you're never alone. Sometimes when we're in this battle, we feel like we're alone. And listen, we all can learn from this book because, again, nobody ever meets perfection unless it's through Christ himself. Amen.
Yeah. Amen.
There are so many books that I know people would love to dig into, particularly this series. How do we find out more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, they can go to my website, jillsavage.org, jillsavage.org, and they can find me there. I'm also active on Instagram and Facebook and a little bit on TikTok. And so you can usually find me at jillsavage.author or jillsavageauthor.
Well, I love this, Jill, because again, you've lived it. You have become very victorious in many, many, many areas that so many of us struggle in. So there's so much wisdom and guidance that you can give all of us. And again, I thank you for your valuable time. Again, everybody, no more perfect moms. Learn to love your real life. Jill, thank you so much for everything you do.
Thanks for having me, Laine.
Thanks for joining me on the Warfare Parenting Podcast. I hope you're leaving with a heart full of hope and some spiritual strategies to help your wayward child and bring your prodigal home. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and with God, everything can change. I invite you to the many free resources at lainelawsoncraft.com. Don't forget to read the free chapter, the first chapter of my newest book, The Parent's Battle Plan, and sign up for weekly encouraging emails too. Stay in touch on social media and don't forget to subscribe. I'm Laine Lawson Craft, reminding you with love and faith, no thing is too hard or big for our God. See you next time.